David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam and the 44 caliber killer, is an American serial killer and former US Army soldier who committed a stabbing and a series of shootings between 1975 and 1977 in New York City, killing 6 people and wounding 11 others. Armed with a 44 special caliber bulldog revolver during most of his crimes, he terrorized New Yorkers with many letters mocking the police and promising further crimes, leading to possibly the biggest manhunt in the city's history. He was arrested on the 10th of August 1977 and subsequently indicted for 8 shootings. He confessed to all of them and initially claimed to have been obeying the orders of a demon manifested in the form of a black dog named Sam that belonged to his neighbour. After he was found mentally competent to stand trial, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 6 concurrent life sentences in state prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He subsequently admitted the dog and devil story was a hoax. In police investigation, he was also implicated in many unsolved arsons in the city. Intense media coverage of the case lent to a kind of celebrity status for him, which many observers noted he seemed to enjoy. The New York State Legislature enacted new statutes known popularly as Son of Sam laws, designed to keep criminals from financially profiting from the publicity created by their crimes. The statutes have remained in New York despite various legal challenges, and similar laws have been enacted in several other states. During the mid-1990s, Berkowitz, then professing to be a converted evangelical Christian, amended his confession to claim he had been a member of a violent satanic cult that orchestrated the incidents as a ritual murder. This was spoken about in the Netflix series. A new investigation of the murders began in 1996 but was suspended indefinitely after inconclusive findings. David Richard Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco on the 1st of June 1953 in Brooklyn, New York City. Within a few days of his birth, his biological mother, Elizabeth Betty Broder, gave him away. She'd grown up as part of an impoverished family and was working as a waitress. In 1936, she married Tony Falco, an Italian-American. However, after a marriage of less than 4 years, Falco left her for another woman. Although she was married to Falco, Berkowitz's biological father was Joseph Kleinman, a married businessman who, like Berkowitz's mother, was Jewish. The then infant Richard was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz of the Bronx. The couple were Jewish hardware store retailers of modest means and childless in middle age. They reversed the order of his first and middle names and gave him their own surname, raising the young boy David Richard Berkowitz as their only child. He had a bar mitzvah and was subsequently bullied for being Jewish. Journalist John Vincent Sanders wrote that Berkowitz's childhood was somewhat troubled. Although of above average intelligence, he lost interest in his education at an early age and became infatuated with petty larceny and starting fires. He suffered head injuries as a child. Neighbours and relatives could recall Berkowitz as difficult, spoiled, and a bully. His adoptive parents consulted at least one psychotherapist due to his misconduct, but his misbehaviour never resulted in legal intervention or serious mention in his school records. His adoptive mother sadly passed away of breast cancer when he was 14, and his home life became somewhat strained in the later years, particularly because he disliked his adoptive father's second wife. He lived with his father while attending Christopher Columbus High School, graduating in 1971, and college in a 4.5-room apartment in 170 Drazed Loop in Co-op City from 1967 to 1971. In 1971, then aged 17, he joined the US Army and served at Fort Knox in the US and with an infantry division in South Korea. After an honourable discharge in June 1974, he located his birth mother, Betty. After a few visits, she disclosed the details of his birth. The news greatly disturbed him, and he was particularly distraught by the array of reluctant father figures. Forensic anthropologist Elliot Layton described Berkowitz's discovery of his birth details as the primary crisis of his life, a revelation that shattered his sense of identity. His communication with his birth mother later lapsed, but for a time he remained in communication with his adoptive sister, Rosalind. He attended Bronx Community College for a year, enrolling in the spring of 1975. In 1976, he was sent to work as a driver for the Co-op City taxi company. He subsequently had several non-professional jobs, and at the time of his arrest, he was working as a letter sorter for the United States Postal Service. During the mid-1970s, he began committing violent crimes. He failed his first attempt at murder by using a knife, then switched to a handgun and began a lengthy crime spree throughout the New York boroughs of the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, seeking young female victims. All but one of the crime scenes involved two victims he infamously committed one of his attacks while the woman was sat with boyfriends in parked cars. He exhibited an enduring enjoyment of his activities, often returning to the scenes of his crimes. He later claimed that when he was 22, he committed his first attack on Christmas Eve 1975 using a hunting knife to stab two women in Co-op City. The first alleged victim, a Hispanic woman, was never identified by police. The second was 15-year-old Michelle Foreman, a sophomore of Truman High School, who he stabbed 6 times on a bridge near Drazer Loop and whose injuries were serious enough for her to be hospitalized for a week. He wasn't suspected of these crimes, and soon afterwards he relocated to an apartment in Yonkers. The first shooting attributed to Berkowitz occurred in the Pelham Bay neighborhood of the Bronx. At about 1:10 a.m. on the 29th of July 1976, Donna Laurie, aged 18, an emergency medical technician, and a friend, Jody Valenti, 19, a nurse, was sitting in Valenti's double-parked Oldsmobile, discussing their evening at Peachtree's, a New Rochelle discotheque. According to Valenti, Lauria opened the car door to leave and noticed a man quickly approaching. Startled and angered by the man's sudden appearance, Laura said, "Now what is this?" The man produced a gun from a paper bag he carried and crouched. Bracing one elbow on his knee, he aimed the weapon with both hands and fired. Laura was struck by a bullet that killed her instantly. Valenti was shot in her thigh, and the third bullet missed both women. The shooter turned and walked away quickly. Valenti survived her injury and said she didn't recognise the killer. She described him as a white male in his 30s with a fair complexion, about 5'8" and weighing about 200 pounds. His hair was short, dark and curly in a mod style. This description was repeated by Lauria's father, who claimed to have seen a similar man sitting in a yellow compact car parked nearby. Neighbours gave corroborating reports to police that an unfamiliar yellow compact car had been cruising in the area for hours before the shooting. Years later, in 1993, an imprisoned Berkowitz admitted on an interview with the journalist Maury Terry that he'd shot Lauria and Valenti. On the 23rd of October 1976, a similar shooting occurred in a secluded residential area of Flushing, Queens, next to Bound Park. Kyle Denaro, 20, a Citibank security guard, and Rosemary Keenan, 18, a Queens College student, were sitting in Keenan's parked car when the windows suddenly shattered. I felt the car exploded, Denaro later said. Keenan quickly started the car and sped away for help. The panicked couple didn't realise that someone had been shooting at them, even though Denaro was bleeding from a bullet wound to his head. Keenan had only superficial injuries from the broken glass, but Denaro eventually needed a metal plate to replace a portion of his skull. Neither of them saw the attacker. Police determined that the bullets embedded in Keenan's car were .44 caliber, but they were so deformed that they thought it was unlikely that they could ever be linked to a particular weapon. Because Denaro had shoulder-length hair, police had later speculated that the shooter had mistaken him for a woman. Keenan's father, veteran police detective of the NYC Police Department, which encouraged an intense investigation. As with the Laura Valenti shooting, however, there seemed to not be any tangible motive for the shooting. Police made little progress with the case. Many details of the Denaro-Keenan shooting were very similar to the Laura Valenti case, but police didn't initially associate them, partly because the shootings occurred in different boroughs and were investigated by different police precincts. High school students Donna DeMasi, 16, and Joanne Lomano, 18, had walked home from a movie shortly after midnight on the 27th of November 1976. They were chatting on the porch of Lomano's home in Floral Park when a young man dressed in military fatigues approached them and began to ask for directions. In a high-pitched voice he said, "Can you tell me how to get?" but then quickly produced a revolver. He then shot each of them once, and as they fell to the ground injured, he fired several more times, striking the house before running away. A neighbour heard the gunshots, rushed out of his house, and reported seeing a blonde man run past gripping a pistol in his left hand. DeMasi had been shot in the neck, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. Lomino was hit in the back and hospitalised in serious condition. She was ultimately rendered paraplegic. At about 12:40 a.m. on the 30th of January 1977, Secretary Christine Freund, 26, and her fiancé bartender John D. Hill, 30, were sitting in D. Hill's car near the Forest Hills LIRR station in Queens, preparing to drive to a dance hall after seeing a movie. 3 gunshots penetrated the car. In a panic, Deal drove away for help. He sustained minor superficial injuries, but Freund was shot twice and died several hours later in the hospital. As with the Denaro-Keenan shooting, neither of them saw their attacker. Police then made the first public acknowledgement of a possible connection between cases, stating that the Freund-Deal shooting was similar to the earlier incidents. All had been struck with .44 caliber bullets, and the shootings seemed to target young women with long dark hair. NYPD Sergeant Richard Coleman stated police were Composite sketches were released of the black-haired Laura Valenti suspect and the blonde Lomino Damasi suspect, and Conlon noted police were looking for multiple suspects, not just one. At about 7:30 p.m. on the 8th of March 1977, Columbia University student Virginia Voshchekiran, 20, was walking home from school when she was confronted by an armed man. She lived about a block from where a friend had been shot. In an attempt to defend herself, she lifted her textbooks between herself and her killer, but the bullet struck her head and ultimately killed her. In a 10th of March 1977 press conference, NYPD officials and Mayor Abraham Beam declared the same .44 Bulldog revolver had fired the shots that killed Lauria and Voshchekiran. Official documents were later brought to the public eye, revealing while police strongly suspected the same .44 Bulldog had been used in the shootings, the evidence was actually inconclusive. The crimes were discussed by local media virtually every day. Circulation increased dramatically in the New York Post and the Daily News tabloid newspapers with graphic crime reporting and commentary. Foreign media featured many of the reports as well, included front-page articles of newspapers such as the Vatican's Osservatore Romano, the Israeli newspaper Mariv, and the Soviet Izvestia. At about 3 a.m. on the 17th of April 1977, Alexander Asau, 20, a tow truck operator, and Valentina Suriani, 18, a Lehman College student, an aspiring actress, and model, were sitting in a cab belonging to Asau's brother on the Hutchinson River Parkway Service Road in the Bronx, about a block from Suriani's home and only a few blocks away from the scene of the Laura Valenti shooting. A resident of a nearby building heard 4 shots and called the police. Suriani, who was sitting in the driver's seat, was shot once and Esso twice, both in the head. Suriani died at the scene and Esso died in the hospital several hours later without being able to describe his attacker or attackers. Police said the weapon used for the crime was the same as the one which they suspected in the earlier shootings. Berkowitz confirmed in 1993 that he was the shooter. Police discovered a handwritten letter near the bodies of Asau and Suriani, written in mostly black block capitals with a few lowercase letters and addressed to the NYPD captain Joseph Borelli. With this letter, Berkowitz identified himself as Son of Sam for the first time. The press had previously dubbed him the .44 caliber killer because of his weapon of choice. The letter was initially withheld from the public, but some of its contents were revealed to the press as he quickly became known as the Son of Sam. The letter expressed the killer's determination to continue his work and taunted police for their fruitless efforts to capture him. In full, with misspellings intact, the letter read, At the time, police speculated that the letter writer might have been familiar with Scottish English. The phrase was taken as a Scottish accented version of The police also hypothesized that the shooter blamed a dark-haired nurse for his father's death due to phrase and the facts that Lauria was a medical technician and that Valenti was studying to be a nurse. The killer's unusual attitude towards the police and the media received widespread scrutiny. Psychologists observed that many serial killers gain gratification by eluding pursuers and observers. The feeling of control over media, law enforcement, and even entire populations provides a source of social power for them. After consulting with several psychiatrists, police released a psychological profile of their suspect on the 26th of May, 1977. He was described as a neurotic who probably had paranoid schizophrenia and believed himself to be a victim of demonic possession. On the 30th of May 1977, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the .44 caliber killer. The letter was postmarked early that same day in Englewood, New Jersey. On the reverse of the envelope, neatly hand-printed in 4 precisely centered lines, were the words, Blood and Family, Darkness and Death, Absolute Depravity, 44. The letter inside read, Underneath Son of Sam was a design that combined several symbols. The writer's question, what will you have for July 29, was considered an ominous threat. The 29th of July would be the anniversary of the Laura Valenti shooting. Breslin notified police, who thought the letter was probably from someone with knowledge of the shootings. The Breslin letter was sophisticated in its wording and presentation, especially when compared to the crudely written first letter, and police suspected that it might have been created in an art studio or similar location by someone with expertise in printing, calligraphy, or graphic design. The unusual all capitals handwriting caused the police to speculate the killer was a comic book letterer, and they asked staff members of DC Comics whether they recognised the lettering. The Wicked King Wicker reference led police to arrange a private screening of The Wicker Man, a 1973 horror movie. The Daily News published the letter a week later, agreeing with the police to withhold portions of the text, and Breslin urged the killer to surrender. The dramatic article made the day's paper the highest-selling edition of the Daily News to date. More than 1.1 million copies were sold. Police received thousands of tips based on references in the publicised portions of the letter, which proved useless. As all of the shooting victims to date had long, dark hair, thousands of women in New York City acquired shortcuts or brightly coloured dyes, and beauty stores had trouble meeting the demand for wigs. On the 26th of June 1977, Salvatore Lupo, 20, a mechanics helper, and Judy Placiado, 17, a recent high school graduate, had left the Elephas discotheque in Bayside, Queens, and were sitting in Lupo's packed car at around 3 a.m. when 3 gunshots blasted through the vehicle. Lupo was wounded in the right forearm, whilst Placido was shot in the right temple, shoulder, and the back of the neck. They both survived their injuries. Lupo told police that they had been discussing the Son of Sam case only moments before the shooting. Neither Lupo nor Placido had seen their attacker, but 2 witnesses reported a tall, dark-haired man in a leisure suit fleeing from the area. One claimed to have seen him leave in a car and even supplied a partial license plate number. With the first anniversary of the initial .44 caliber shootings approaching, police established a sizable dragnet that emphasised past hunting grounds in Queens and the Bronx. However, the next and final .44 shooting occurred in Brooklyn. Early on the 31st of July 1977, Secretary Stacy Moskowitz and clothing salesman Robert Violante, both 20, were sitting in Violante's car, which was parked under a streetlight near a city park in Bath Beach, on their first date. They were kissing when a man approached within 3 feet of the passenger side of the car and fired 4 rounds, striking both of them in the head before he escaped into the park. Violante lost his left eye. Moskowitz, the only blonde victim of Berkowitz, died from her injuries. That night, Detective John Falocio was awakened at home and told to report to the 10th Homicide Division at the 60th Precinct Station House in Coney Island. He was given just 2 weeks to work on the Moskowitz and Violante case. As a normal murder investigation, if it couldn't be solved in that time frame, it would be given to the Son of Sam task force. Local resident Cecilia Davis was walking her dog at the scene of the Moskowitz-Violante shooting, and then, when she saw patrol officer Michael Catanero ticketing a parked car near a fire hydrant. Moments after the traffic police had left, a young man walked past her from the area of the car and seemed to study her with some interest. Davis felt concerned because he was holding some kind of dark object in his hand. She ran to her home only to hear shots fired behind her in the street. She remained silent about this experience for 4 days until she contacted police, who checked every car who'd been ticketed in that area that night. Berkowitz's yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy was among the cars they investigated. On the 9th of August 1977, NYPD detective James Justice telephoned the Yonkers Police Department to ask them to schedule an interview with Berkowitz. The Yonkers police dispatcher who took this call was Wheat Carr, who recognised the name David Berkowitz and said, "Let me tell you about him. I know him. He lives right behind me." She told Justice that Berkowitz had shot and wounded a Labrador retriever belonging to her father, Sam Carr. When Justice heard Sam, he had a strong feeling that Berkowitz was the person they'd been looking for. Wheat Carr's brothers, John and Michael, were later alleged to be cult confederates of Berkowitz. Justice asked Yonkers police to help tracking down Berkowitz. According to Mike Novotny, a Yonkers police sergeant, the department had their own suspicions about Berkowitz in connection with strange crimes in their jurisdiction, referred to in one of the Son of Sam letters. Yonkers investigators told Justice that Berkowitz might indeed be the Son of Sam. The following day, on the 10th of August 1977, police investigated Berkowitz's car, which was parked outside his apartment building at 35 Pine Street, Yonkers. They saw a gun in the back seat, subsequently searched the car, and found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Son of Sam Task Force. Police waited for him to leave the apartment. Rather than risk a violent confrontation in the building's narrow hallway, they also waited to obtain a search warrant for the apartment, worried that their search might otherwise be challenged in court. The initial search of the vehicle was based on the handgun visible in the back seat, although possession of such a gun was illegal in New York State and required no special permit. The warrant still had not arrived when Berkowitz exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m. and entered his car. Detective John Falocio approached the driver's side of the car and pointed his gun close to Berkowitz's temple, whilst Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger's side. A paper bag containing a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver of the type identified in ballistic tests was found next to Berkowitz in the car. Berkowitz then stated flatly, "Well, you got me." As described in The Son of Sam, 1981, by Lawrence Day Klosner, Falocio remembered the big, inexplicable smile on the man's face. An alternate version reports that Berkowitz's first words were, "Well, you got me. How come it took you such a long time?" Falocio was officially credited by the NYPD as the arresting officer of The Son of Sam. Police searched Berkowitz's apartment and found it in disarray with satanic graffiti on the walls. They also found diaries which he had kept since he was 21, 3 stenographer's notebooks, nearly all full wherein Berkowitz meticulously noted hundreds of fires throughout NYC. Berkowitz confessed that he was also the Phantom of the Bronx, an unidentified individual or individuals responsible for more than 2,000 arsons committed around the city throughout the 1970s. Soon after his arrest, the address of the apartment building was changed from 35 Pine Street to 42 Pine Street in an attempt to end its notoriety. Berkowitz was briefly held in a Yonkers police station before being transported directly to the 60th Precinct in Coney Island, where the Son of Sam task force was located. At about 1 a.m, Mayor Beam arrived to see the suspect personally. After a brief and wordless encounter, he announced to the media, "The people of the city of New York can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the Son of Sam." Berkowitz was interrogated for about 30 minutes in the early morning of the 11th of August 1977. He quickly confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. The investigation was led by John Keenan, who took the confession. During questioning, Berkowitz claimed his neighbour's dog was one of the reasons he killed, stating the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls. He said that Sam, mentioned in the first letter, was his former neighbour Sam Carr, and that Carr's black Labrador, which was possessed by an ancient demon, which issued irresistible commands that Berkowitz kill people. A few weeks after his capture, he was permitted to communicate with the press. A letter to the New York Post dated September 19th, 1977, he alluded to his original story of demonic possession, but closed with a warning interpreted by some investigators as an admission of criminal accomplices. "There are other sons out there. God help the world." However, at a press conference in February 1979, he declared his previous claims of demonic possession were a hoax. He later stated in a series of meetings with his special court-appointed psychiatrist, David Abramson, that he had long contemplated murder to get revenge on the world he felt that rejected and hurt him. He also told interrogators that he was planning to end his spree by going down in a blaze of glory at a Hamptons nightclub. 3 separate mental health examinations determined Berkowitz was competent to stand trial. Despite this, defence lawyers advised him to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, but he refused. He appeared calm in court on the 8th of May 1979 and pleaded guilty to all the shootings. At his sentencing 2 weeks later, he caused an uproar when he attempted to jump out of the window of the 7th floor courtroom. He was restrained. He later chanted, The court ordered another psychiatric examination before sentencing could proceed. During the evaluation, he drew a sketch of a jailed man surrounded by numerous walls, and at the bottom he wrote, "I am not well at all." Nonetheless, he was again found competent to stand trial. On the 12th of June 1978, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for each murder to be served consecutively. He was ordered to serve time in Attica Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in upstate New York. Despite prosecutors' objections, the terms of his guilty plea made him liable for parole in just 25 years. After his arrest, he was initially confined to a psychiatric ward in Kings County Hospital, where staff reported he seemed remarkably untroubled by his new environment. On the day after his sentencing, he was taken to Sing Sing Prison, then to the upstate Clinton Correctional Facility for psychiatric and physical examinations. 2 more months were spent at the Central New York Psychiatric Center in Marcy before his admission to Attica Prison. He served around a decade in Attica until he was relocated in 1990 to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, where he remained for many years. Later, he was transferred to Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Ulster County. He described his life in Attica Correctional Facility as a nightmare. In 1979, there was an attempt on his life in which the left side of his neck was slashed from front to back, resulting in a wound that required more than 50 stitches to close. He refused to identify his assailant and claimed only that he was grateful for the attack. It brought a sense of justice, or in his own words, the punishment I deserve. In 1987, he said that he'd become an evangelical Christian, reporting that his moment of conversation occurred after reading Psalm 34:6 from a Bible given to him by a fellow inmate. He expressed a wish to be referred to as the Son of Hope instead of Son of Sam. Soon after his imprisonment, he invited Malachi Martin, an exorcist, to help him compose an autobiography, but the offer was declined. During later years, he developed his memoirs with assistance from fellow evangelicals. His statements were released in a 1998 interview video, Son of Hope, with a more extensive work released in book form titled Son of Hope, The Prison Journals of David Berkowitz, 2006. He doesn't receive any royalties or profits from any of the sales of his works. He's continued to write essays on faith and repentance for evangelical websites. A website is maintained on his behalf by a church group. Like most prisoners in general, he isn't allowed access to a computer. He stays involved with prison ministry and regularly counsels troubled inmates. While in the Sullivan facility, he pursued education and graduated with honours from Sullivan Community College. He is entitled to a parole hearing every 2 years as mandated by state law, though he's consistently refused to ask for his release, sometimes skipping the hearings altogether. Before his first parole hearing in 2002, he sent a letter to the New York Governor, George Pataki, requesting that it be cancelled. He wrote, officials at the Sullivan facility rejected his request. At his 2016 hearing at Shawangunk, New York, Berkowitz stated that while parole was unrealistic, he felt that he'd improved himself behind bars, adding, I feel I am no risk whatsoever. His lawyer Mark Heller noted that prison staff considered Berkowitz to be a model prisoner. Commissioners denied parole. His 12th parole hearing was denied in May 2024. Ahead of this hearing, he acknowledged to the New York Post that he had no chance of getting granted parole, but he still attended the hearing. He further added, his next parole hearing is scheduled for May 2026. In 2002, during the DC sniper attacks, Berkowitz wrote a letter telling the sniper to stop hurting innocent people. He made his comments in a 3-page letter to Fox News personality Rita Cosby after she wrote to him seeking his comment on the sniper attacks. During June 2005, he sued one of his previous lawyers for misappropriation of a large number of letters, photographs, and other personal possessions. Hugo Hertemat, a New Jersey attorney, had represented Berkowitz in an earlier legal effort to prevent the National Enquirer from buying one of his letters. Hermat then self-published his own collection of letters and memorabilia, Dear David 2005, which he had obtained from Berkowitz during their consultations. Berkowitz stated that he would drop the lawsuit only if the attorney agreed to sign over all the money he had made to the victims' families. In October 2006, Berkowitz and Hermat settled out of court, with Hermat agreeing to return the disputed items and to donate part of his book profits to the New York State Crimes Victims Board. In 1979, Berkowitz mailed a book about witchcraft to police in North Dakota. He had underlined several passages and had written a few marginal notes, including the phrase, the reference was to Alice Perry, a 19-year-old North Dakota newlywed who had been murdered at Stanford on the 12th of October 1974. Her death and the notorious abuse of her corpse in a chapel on campus was a widely reported case. Berkowitz mentioned the Perry attack in other letters, suggesting that he knew details from the perpetrator himself. Local police investigators interviewed him, but by 2004 concluded that he had nothing of value to offer. The Perry case was solved in 2018. After his admission to Sullivan Prison, he began to claim that he joined a satanic cult in the spring of 1975. In 1993, he made these claims known where he announced to the press that he had killed only 3 of the Son of Sam victims, Loria, Esau, and Suriani. In a revised version of the events, he said that the other shooters were involved and that he fired the gun only in the first attack, Loria Valenti, and the 6th, Esau and Suriani. He said that he and several other cult members were involved in every incident by planning the events, providing early surveillance of the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers of the crime scenes. He stated that he couldn't divulge the names of most of the accomplices without putting his family directly in risk. Among his alleged unnamed associates was a female cult member who he claims fired the gun at Denaro and Keenan. He attributed the survival to the alleged accomplice's unfamiliarity of the powerful recoil of a .44 Bulldog. He declared that at least 5 cult members were at the scene of the Front Deal shooting, but that the actual shooter was a prominent cult associate who had been brought in from outside New York with an unspecified motive, a cult member whom he identified only by his nickname, Manson 2. Another unnamed person was the gunman in the Moskowitz-Violante case, a male cult member who had arrived from North Dakota for the occasion, also without explanation. Berkowitz did name 2 of the cult members, John and Michael Carr. The 2 men were sons of the dog owner, Sam Carr, and they lived on nearby Warburton Avenue. Both of these other Son of Sam were long dead. John Carr had been killed in a shooting judged as suicide in North Dakota during 1979, and Michael Carr had been in a fatal car accident in 1979. Berkowitz claimed that the perpetrator of the Domasi Lomino shooting was John, and he added that a youngest police officer, also a cult member, was involved in the crime. He claimed that Michael fired the shots at Lupo and Placido. Author Morris Terry wrote that Michael was an active member of the Church of Scientology and noted that Berkowitz, at the time of his arrest, had been in possession of a list of telephone numbers, including the number for the Fort Harrison Hotel, the church's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, Florida. In a video interview posted in 2016, Berkowitz said that he'd been influenced by reading literature from the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Journalist John Hockenberry asserted that, even apart from the satanic cult claims, some officials doubted the single shooter theory, writing, John Santucci, a Queens District Attorney at the time for the killings, and police investigator Mike Novatoni both expressed their convictions that Berkowitz had accomplices. NYPD officer Richard Johnson, involved with the original investigation, opened that unresolved discrepancies in statements from witnesses and survivor victims indicate Berkowitz didn't act alone. Other contemporaries voiced their belief in the satanic cult theory, including Donna Lauria's father. Berkowitz survivor Cal Denaro stated his opinion that more than one person was involved, but admitted he couldn't prove the cult theory. His conclusion rests on the criticism of Berkowitz's statement to police was as totally false. Deal's recollection is that he physically bumped into Berkowitz outside the Wine Gallery restaurant, and that he had departed and walked to his car where the shooting occurred. Berkowitz, in contrast, told police that he passed within a few feet of Deal and Freund shortly before they entered the car. Deal contends that he and Freund passed no one on their way to the car, and that the position of the car parked on the curb would have made it impossible for Berkowitz to have sneaked up on them in the few minutes between their encounter outside the restaurant and the shooting in the car. Deal thus reasons that he was shot by someone other than Berkowitz. Journalist Maury Terry published a series of investigative articles for Garnet newspapers in 1979, which challenged the official finding of a lone gunman in the Son of Sam case. Largely impelled by reports of accomplices and satanic cult activity, the Son of Sam case was reopened by Yonkers police during 1996, but no new charges were filed. Due to a lack of findings, the investigation was eventually suspended but remains open. Berkowitz's later claims about having been in a satanic cult were widely dismissed. Breslin rejected his theory of satanic cult accomplices, stating that other skeptics included former FBI profiler John Edward Douglas, who spent hours interviewing Berkowitz and concluded that he was a NYPD psychologist Dr. Harvey Schlossberg stated in Against the Law, a documentary about the Son of Sam case, that he believes that the satanic cult claims are nothing but a fantasy concocted by Berkowitz to absolve himself of guilt. In his book Hunting Humans 2001, Elliot Layton argued that recent journalistic attempts to abridge or even deny Berkowitz's guilt have lacked all credibility. Decades after his arrest, the name Son of Sam remains widely recognised as that of a notorious serial killer, with popular culture manifestations perpetuating this. Berkowitz himself continued to express a remorse on Christian websites and on more mainstream news, including speaking out against gun violence and instead spreading the message to take the glory out of guns. Naya Moskowitz, who previously hadn't hidden her hatred for Berkowitz, wrote him a letter shortly before her own death in 2006, forgiving him for killing her daughter Stacy. Moskowitz lost all of her children at young ages. Jodie, aged 9, in a possible suicide in 1968, Stacy and Ricky, aged 37, in 1999, of scleroderma. After rampant speculation about publishers offering Berkowitz large sums of money for a story, the New York State legislature swiftly passed a new law that prevented convicted criminals and their relatives from making any financial profit from books, movies, or other enterprises related to the stories of their crimes. The United States Supreme Court struck down the so-called Son of Sam law for violating the First Amendment's right of free expression in the 1991 case of Simon & Schuster, Inc. versus Crime Victims Board, but New York produced a constitutionally revised version of the law the following year. Similar laws have been enacted in 41 states at a federal level. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Are there any other true crime cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel? If so, let me know in the comments. What are your thoughts and opinions about this case? Also let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back next Friday at 5 o'clock with another true crime case.